Hello everyone, I'm Hunter Ohanian and I'm the director of the College Art Association, and I'm here today to chat with Lev Manovich. Hello Lev, how are you?
Hello, great.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thank you for welcoming us to your home here in Chelsea, in New York.
I'm honored.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to be out on the roof of your house. And how long have you lived in this neighborhood in New York?
So I was before I was a professor in the art department, University of California, San Diego, between 1996 to 2013. And when I was offered the job as a professor at the Graduate Center CUNY, so I rented this place, and I love it.
Yeah.
Because all the top blue chip galleries are right next door.
Right.
So if I want, I can go in my pajamas to Gagosian Pace.
How great that you just get to go out in your pajamas and go to Pace or Gagosian or wherever. Okay, so you got your PhD from the University of Rochester. You got your MA from NYU. You got your BA from there as well too. And what I think is really interesting is you have a degree from the Moscow Institute of Architecture that you got in 1977 and 79. In addition, you've won many awards, including the Mellon Fellowship in Art Criticism. You won a Guggenheim in 2003. But let's circle back to your time in Moscow. What was that like? When you were there, Leonid Brezhnev was the head of the Soviet Union. What was that like as a young scholar?
Well, so when I left in the early 80s, I was 21.
Wow.
So I wasn't a scholar yet.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to finish the institute. I only spent about 2 years. So I grew up in the 70s, right, which was the kind of final phase of the Soviet Union and the whole communist system. And looking back, I'm so glad that I grew up on this crazy, different planet. Because when you come to the States, especially at that time, everything was so different.
Right.
And I think this experience of growing up there is completely responsible for my whole career. Because I think when I look at contemporary, let's say, culture, because since the time, right, we kind of West and capitalism kind of really became dominant worldwide, I have my alien perspective.
Right.
And I think it helps me to see things in a very kind of strange ways, right, like estrangement. And another thing which, of course, I miss a lot. So during the time, everything was forbidden. The people published things like samizdat. You couldn't buy like foreign books in bookstores, but people were still able to do independent culture. So people would have exhibitions of art in the apartment. And somebody would call you and say, go to this apartment, and the exhibition would last 5 hours. And because everything was forbidden, when people were able to do something like this and you were able to go to them, everybody just felt so excited.
Sure.
Right? Whereas today I think we have abundance of information opportunity exhibitions. There's 1,700 galleries in New York. There's like hundreds of art biennales. You can follow any artist, right, online. And I'm always surprised that my students, well, many of them don't take advantage of it.
Right.
Because for me, kind of growing up in a country where there was information hunger, right? I love internet. I love Instagram. Like basically what I do before I go to sleep, I read Wikipedia. So this abundance of information, the fact that I can find out about so many things, and I can also see what artists are creating, in tens of thousands of cities around the world from my computer. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So you're now a professor at the Graduate Center at CUNY, and you're the director of the Cultural Analytics Lab, which was founded in 2008. And from what I've read, you developed the concept of cultural analytics in 2005. Tell us, what is cultural analytics?
So in the middle of 2000s, this new term, digital humanities, started to become more and more popular. And in this decade, it has really been very widely discussed in the academy. But just as today, at the time, people were starting to use kind of computational tools to analyze, let's say, culture, not looking, let's say, 10 novels, but looking at 10,000 novels. So analyzing culture at scale, but the focus of this work has largely been literature. So when I saw it, I said, well, we kind of need a different term to indicate that we also want to apply these methods to study kind of history of culture, history of art, history of visual media, and also contemporary media, whether it is web design, Instagram photography. So I come up with this kind of term, and today, there are hundreds of thousands of papers where people analyze, for example, social media or visual social media, and these papers are done by people in computer science, computational social science, digital anthropology, digital history, and also in the recently emerging field or paradigm of digital history. So I think when I started, there was really just few papers, and now I can use this term more like umbrella to describe this research, which includes not only publications in academic journals, but also art projects, exhibitions, right? Software people, share online. So today, research, right? The research outputs or research tools also include software, data sets. Let's say Google has this amazing cultural institute, and they curate with beautiful exhibitions, of images. So it's also in a way cultural analytics.
Right.
So I would say it's use of computation, not only to analyze, let's say visual media or artistic media, but also to teach it, and also to create new interfaces for interacting with it.
Yeah. One of the questions, the research questions that you pose, of course, in the lab is how can we observe giant cultural universes of both user-generated and professional media content created today without reducing them to averages, outliers, or pre-existing categories? How is your research developed in that area?
So I think when I started, right, I was so fascinated with that within a couple of years, the number of cultural producers and visual artifacts we create exploded the way like universe, let's say, grew after Big Bang, so to speak. Right? So, let's say before, right, if we're writing about Italian Renaissance, the 1940s Hollywood cinema, we could basically have a limited number of artifacts, limited number of artists, and we can kind of observe it in a way with your own eyes. Right, so in 2005, when people started sharing things on Flickr and on YouTube, and Instagram and Twitter and so on, right? Today, people are sharing over 2 billion images per day. So
amazing, 2 billion, billion a day.
It's growing.
Wow, amazing.
So so there is no way, right, for you to observe with your own eyes.
Right.
So I find this a great challenge, but I also find this fascinating.
Right.
It's the only way for me to see, for example, okay, what are the different content people create? What are the different styles? In the case of photography, what are photographic techniques, right? In a way, it's like this invisible world because it's too big, right? So if I use something like telescope, microscope, I can only see so much.
Right.
So I said, well, it's not that I like computers so much, I do, but I have to turn to computers and techniques of data science just to be able to see what is out there. And it's particularly important if you don't start from some pre-existing categories. Because let's say you say, okay, I want to look at contemporary Instagram using categories like selfie, portrait, still life. But we don't know what other genres are there.
Sure.
We don't know what kind of hybrid genres. So I said, as opposed to starting with particular categories, even training computer to find images with categories, if I do it, I'm only going to confirm what I already know.
Right.
So for me, cultural analytics is basically about questioning everything we know.
Wow.
So using the challenge of big data to question what we know. So I said, what I actually want to do is not necessarily statistics, but visualization. I want to sample these universes, and I want to bring thousands or millions of images before my eyes. Even I myself is going to see all kinds of interesting patterns, which perhaps don't fit in existing categories.
Right.
So it's really about observing in a very precise way, right? Or you can also connect it to origins of our history, right? And Wolfram, where Wolfram kind of basically, right, created this new method, which our historians use throughout the 20th century of comparing images in 2 slides. So how do you compare billions of images?
Right.
So I see cultural analytics in a way is extension of comparative method in humanities.
You also look in the lab about how you use data to measure diversity, variability, differences, and temporal changes in these cultural data sets. What are some conclusions you've drawn from that as well?
So, we looked at everything from 20th century cartoons, films, TV series, posters, book pages, Time magazine covers, 1 million manga pages, 1 million artworks from DeviantArt, 60 million Instagram photos. And I said, so these are all very different types of visual culture. So if I'm to develop some methodology, which I can teach to students, in general, right, what we should look at.
Right.
Like for example, if we look at visual art, we're talking about, I don't know, maybe topics, style, etc. If we're looking at literature, we'll be looking at other things. So if we abstract from these media-specific categories, what else? So I said, well, we can talk about how certain part of culture develop over time. And we use computers that allows us to see to continuous changes. We can take different data sets and compare them. So for example, I want to compare million paintings done in Brooklyn versus million paintings done, I don't know, in 798 in Beijing.
Sure.
So how do you compare data on a scale? And when we can think about variability, so you say, okay, there's a particular genre of selfie. So there's a canonical selfie. And then there are millions of selfies which are very close or very far from a genre. So you kind of think of a particular genre or particular idiom, right? Let's say 19th century French still life. And when you can situate our works in terms of how we're close to the center of this, and finally we can talk about diversity. So when we talk about variability, it's like statistics, right? It's how far particular data point from average. Variability is more like ecology. How many different species of animals we observe in this forest? So today if we observe, for example, like something like Instagram, we're not going to find billion different species of images. We maybe find 350 or maybe 1,000 or maybe 500. And the same thing if you look at 19th century painting or 16th century art in China. So typically art historians have been describing it, I think, in a very reductive way, saying, well, there's 4 styles, there's 4 types. So what if we start saying, well, maybe it's not 4 styles, maybe it's 400 styles or 40. So simply having, so it's not about throwing away categories, it's having more categories. The way people basically do it in science, right? So the way biologists describe life on Earth, saying there's 100 million species, and they're able to deal with it. Well, what if we start dealing with 10,000 species of images? Why not, right? So it's basically in a way bringing our reflection about, I think, visual culture a bit up to date to what is used actually outside of humanities, where people are able to look at things in a more precise way and make many more distinctions.
And of course, using social media and a lot of the stuff that you do today, it's great that you're able to mix fine art and popular culture at the same time, and the culture around everybody, and sort of bringing that in as to what their lives are about, and you're mixing those two things. But when you look at it,
well, I think it connects to another point which we talked about right before we started. That today we have like 4 billion mobile subscriptions, right? So not all of them are smartphones, but let's say there's at least like 1 billion people which have smartphones, and the Canva was free software. Not only, let's say again, Instagram app, but over 2,000 apps to edit images. So let's say when I started doing digital art 30 years ago, you can put all the people who do digital art in one room. And then let's say 20 years ago, you can put them all in maybe 300 people. And now we have billion people. Right? So in a way we have 1 billion artists and 1 billion photographers. And if you look closely, you can find all kinds of things. You find things which are maybe very, let's say, something that people copy from somebody else, but you also find lots of diversity. So what I want to do is I want to expose this diversity, because I think ultimately, if you are to collect enough of a sample of contemporary art, perhaps you may find more diversity on social media, because contemporary art, you also have certain fashions, certain waves, right? Today we have this in fashion, tomorrow, right? So we have this idea which comes from the 19th century with art is something special, it's romantic, it's the best of humanity. But today, right, you don't need to go to art school, design school to be artist, and you can basically have viewers on your work on social media.
Sure, it creates an audience.
So I think intellectuals tend to dismiss it as something trivial, something banal. Well, that's not being intellectual, right? So I want to take it seriously.
No, that's good. You've brought Instagram up a few times, and how many followers do you have on Instagram?
So basically last year, right, I was writing this book in real time about Instagram. I would observe something, write a chapter. So I have these 4 chapters on my website. And so when I did this research over about 3 years, I basically figure out some principles, what you have to do to have many followers. There are also thousands of articles about it. So in my case, I don't follow any rules, so I only have a couple of thousand followers. On Twitter, I also read about, I read, for example, research which says if you want your tweet to be retweeted, it has to be between 110 and 130 characters. I follow statistics given to me free by software. What's the best time for me to tweet? So on Twitter, I follow all the rules. So I have over 20,000, right?
Wow.
So if you follow the rules, but then of course limited to what you can say.
Sure. obviously you're coming into contact with a lot of students these days, and a lot of people who are either art makers or scholars or thinking about digital media. What kind of advice do you have for people entering the art world, whether they're creative or whether they're writing? What would you tell them?
Well, I hope it's people are not entering art world. I hope they're entering cultural world.
Interesting.
Because the art world is just a very small part of it.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't know a single person who actually takes contemporary art world seriously.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, in my view, feels like design or science, even food, more interesting. But that's my opinion.
Yep.
Right. So to be an artist in the art world is not the only choice anymore, right? So I think if people are young, right? So I would say so there are two reasons why I would recommend people learn like a bit of programming and a bit about data. So first of all, this is a world we live in, right? So production, analysis, algorithms based on data are central to contemporary world, as electricity was central to early 20th century, and steam engines were central to industrial world of 1820. So if you simply want to understand the world in which you live in, like why Facebook recommends me these people as opposed to that people, like how does the navigation system of my car works? You should basically have some computer literacy, data literacy. You should learn something about algorithms, basic programming, how to make a web page, how to analyze data, a bit of statistics. But otherwise, I don't think you can say very relevant things about the world today, maybe you're artist or historian, sculptor, right? And the second thing, I think, for professional advancement, right? So the digital humanities started in the early 2000s. In the last 5 or 6 years, we see many jobs where people want somebody who does 19th century novel or 18th century theater plus digital humanities, right? So in this decade and probably next decade, this is something which actually would help you to get a job, because it's a new thing, everybody wants it, and most people don't do it. So simply from this very practical point of view, digital art history is something which really exists. It's something which formally started maybe around 2012. So it's very new.
Yeah.
And it will get bigger the way it happened in English or comparative literature. So I think if you're entering the art history while you're still young, take some online class, learn a bit of programming, and also learn about things which are specific to art history. For example, how this computer looks at images. Learn a bit about computer vision. Because, regardless of whether you're going to be using it in your work, in 5 years you may be interviewing people, ask you, do you know that?
Right.
And your students will be doing it, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's not about giving up humanity, it's not about giving up theory, it's not about giving up analytical thinking, but it's simply adding contemporary methods to the methods which we inherited in, let's say, the last 300 years.
Yeah. You've been to many CAA conferences, and it's been great that you've spoken. I hope you get to come to another one. Our next one will be in Los Angeles in February 2018, so I hope you can come to that one as well.
I appreciate it very much. So the first time I was at CAA, I was still a student.
Yeah.
It was in 1990, it was in Seattle.
Yeah.
And I actually met a couple of people who became my best friends.
Fabulous, I love that.
And I'm very lucky that now I'm in New York, and CAA is in New York every other year, so I always come. I'm on the panels. And people have to realize that it's amazing that this CAA exists.
Yeah.
Because in most countries you don't have anything like this. You maybe only have 2,000 historians in Switzerland,
right?
Or we don't have this organization. So the fact that with the organization, we bring this together, there are conferences, job placement, there's all kinds of things you can develop. Yeah, maybe, we always complain that every organization is bureaucratic, but it's fantastic that CAA exists.
Yeah.
So I wish you guys all luck, and I think we all should support it.
Yeah.
And it's up to us, if we don't say something, we say website, up to us to put it there. And I think with interviews, this fantastic, interesting project to also make CAA kind of more visual,
Correct.
and more interactive.
Yeah.
So
thank you
so much.
Thank you, and thank you for this great view and for inviting us to your roof here. It's really
Come
great.
anytime.
Yeah, thank you.
Drink some beers.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.